Microsoft Visual C++ is an integrated development environment product from Microsoft for the C, C++, and C++ CLI programming languages. MSVC is proprietary software. It was originally a standalone product but later became a part of Visual Studio and made available in both trialware and freeware forms. It features tools for developing and debugging C++ code, especially code written for Windows API, DirectX and .NET Framework. Many applications require redistributable Visual C++ packages to function correctly. These packages are often installed independently of applications, allowing multiple applications to make use of the package while only having to install it once. These Visual C++ redistributable and runtime packages are mostly installed for standard libraries that many applications use. History. The predecessor to Visual C++ was called Microsoft C, C++. There was also a Microsoft QuickC 2.5 and a Microsoft QuickC for Windows 1.0. The Visual C++ compiler is still known as Microsoft C, C++, and as of the release of Visual C++ 2013, is on version 18.0, 21005.1. 16-bit versions. Microsoft C 1.0, based on Lattice C, was Microsoft's first C product in 1983. It was not K&RC. C 2.0 added large model support. C 3.0 was the first version developed inside Microsoft. This version intended compatibility with K&R and the later ANSI standard. It was being used inside Microsoft in early 1984. It shipped as a product in 1985. C 4.0 added optimizations and code view, a source-level debugger. C 5.0 added loop optimizations and huge model support. Microsoft's Fortran and the first 32-bit compiler for 80,386 were also part of this project. C 5.1, released in 1988, allowed compiling programs for OS 2.1 X. C 6.0, released in 1989. It added global flow analysis, a source browser, and a new debugger, and included an optional C++ front-end. C 7.0 was released in 1992. Added built-in support for C++ and MFC 1.0. Visual C++ 1.0, which included MFC 2.0, was the first version of Visual C++, released in February 1993. It was C-Front 2.1 compliant and available in 2 editions. Standard replaced QuickC for Windows. Professional replaced C. C++ 7.0 included the ability to build both DOS and Windows applications, an optimizing compiler, a source profiler, and the Windows 3.1 SDK. The FileApp 286 DOS Extender Lite was also included. Visual C++ 1.5 was released in December 1993, included MFC 2.5, and added OLE 2.0 and ODBC support to MFC. It was the first version of Visual C++ that came only on CD-ROM. Visual C++ 1.51 and 1.52 were available as part of a subscription service. Visual C++ 1.52b is similar to 1.52, but does not include the Control Development Kit. Visual C++ 1.52c was a patched version of 1.5. It is the last, and arguably most popular, development platform for Microsoft Windows 3 X. It is available through Microsoft Developer Network. Strictly 32-bit versions. Visual C++ 1.0 was the first version for 32-bit development. Although released when 16-bit 1.5 was available, it did not include support for OLE2 and ODBC. It was also available in a bundle called Visual C++ 16/32 Suite, which included Visual C++ 1.5, Visual C++ 2.0, which included MFC 3.0, was the first version to be 32-bit only. In many ways, this version was ahead of its time, since Windows 95, then codenamed Chicago, was not yet released, and Windows NT had only a small market share. As a result, this release was almost a lost generation. Microsoft included an updated Visual C++ 1.5 as part of the 2x releases up to 2.1, which included Visual C++ 1.52, and both 16-bit and 32-bit version of the Control Development Kit were included. Visual C++ 2x also supported Win32's development. It is available through Microsoft Developer Network. There was a Visual C++ 2.0 RISC edition for MIPS and Alpha processors, as well as a cross-platform edition for the Macintosh. Visual C++ 2.1 and 2.2 were updates for 2.0 available through subscription. Visual C++ 4.0, released on the 11th of December 1995, introduced the Developer Studio IDE. Its then novel tiled layout of non-overlapping panels, navigation panel, combination editor, source-level debugger panel, and console output panel continues through the Visual Studio products line. Visual C++ 4.0 included MFC 4.0, was designed for Windows 95 and Windows NT. To allow support of legacy projects, 4.0 came bundled with the Visual C++ 1.52 installation CD. Updates available through subscription included Visual C++ 4.1, which came with the Microsoft Game SDK, and Visual C++ 4.2. Version number 3.0 was skipped to achieve version number parity between Visual C++ 4.0 and MFC 4.0. Visual C++ 4.2 did not support Windows 3.x development. This was the final version with a cross-platform edition for the Macintosh available, and it differed from the 2.x version in that it also allowed compilation for the PowerPC instruction set. Visual C++ 5.0, which included MFC 4.21 and was released the 28th of April 1997, was a major upgrade from 4.2, available in 4 editions: Learning, Professional, Enterprise, and RISC. Visual C++ 6.0, which included MFC 6.0, was released in 1998. The release was somewhat controversial since it did not include an expected update to MFC. Visual C++ 6.0 is still quite popular and often used to maintain legacy projects. There are, however, issues with this version under Windows XP, especially under the debugging mode. The debugging issues can be solved with a patch called the Visual C++ 6.0 Processor Pack, version number 12.00 8804. Visual C++ Net 2002, which included MFC 7.0, was released in 2002 with support for link-time cogeneration and debugging runtime checks. Net 1.0, and Visual C Hash and Managed C++. The new user interface used many of the hotkeys and conventions of Visual Basic, which accounted for some of its unpopularity among C++ developers. Version number 13.00 9466. Visual C++ Net 2003, which included MFC 7.1, was released in 2003 along with Net 1.1 and was a major upgrade to Visual C++ Net 2002. It was considered a patch to Visual C++ Net 2002. Accordingly, The English language upgrade version of Visual Studio Net 2003 shipped for minimal cost to owners of the English language version of Visual Studio Net 2002. This was the last version to support Windows 95 and NT 4.0 as a target version number. The 13th of October 3077. Embedded Visual C++ in various versions was used to develop for some versions of the Windows CE operating system. Initially it replaced a development environment consisting of tools added onto Visual C++ 6.0. Embedded Visual C++ was replaced as a separate development environment by Microsoft Visual Studio 2005. 32-bit and 64-bit versions Visual C++ 2005, which included MFC 8.0, was released in November 2005. Managed C++ for CLI is still available via compiler options, though. It also introduced OpenMP. With Visual C++ 2005, Microsoft also introduced Team Foundation Server. Visual C++ 8.0 has problems compiling MFC AppWizard projects that were created using Visual Studio 6.0. So maintenance of legacy projects can be continued with the original ID if rewriting is not feasible. Visual C++ 2005 is the last version able to target Windows 98 and Windows ME. SP1 version is also available in Microsoft Windows SDK update for Windows Vista. Visual C++ 2008 was released in November 2007. This version supports Net 3.5. Managed C++ for CLI is still available via compiler options. By default, all applications compiled against the Visual C++ 2008 runtimes will only work under Windows 2000 and later. A feature pack released for VC9, later included in SP1, added support for C++ TR1 library extensions. SP1 version is also available in Microsoft Windows SDK for Windows 7. Visual C++ 2010 was released on April 12, 2010. It uses a SQL Server compact database to store information about the source code, including IntelliSense information, for better IntelliSense and code completion support. However, Visual C++ 2010 does not support IntelliSense for C++ CLI. This version adds a C++ parallel computing library called the Parallel Patterns Library, partial support for C++ 11. Significantly improved IntelliSense based on the Edson Design Group front-end, and performance improvements to both the compiler and generated code. This version is built on Net 4.0, but supports compiling to machine code. The partial C++ 11 support mainly consists of 6 compiler features: lambdas, R-value references, auto, declare type, static underscore assert, and null PTR. C++ 11 also supports library features. Variadic templates were also considered, but delayed until some future version due to having a lower priority, which stemmed from the fact that, unlike other costly-to-implement features, variadic templates would benefit only a minority of library writers, rather than the majority of compiler end users. By default, all applications compiled against Visual C++ 2010 runtimes only work on Windows XP SP2 and later. The RTM version is also available in Windows SDK for Windows 7 and .NET Framework 4. SP1 version is available as part of Visual Studio 2010 Service Pack 1 or through the Microsoft Visual C++ 2010 Service Pack 1 compiler update for the Windows SDK 7.1. Visual C++ 2012 was released on August 15, 2012. It features improved C++ 11 support, and support for Windows runtime development. Visual C++ 2013 was released on October 17, 2013. It features further C++11 and C99 support, and introduces a REST SDK. Visual C++ 2015 was released on July 20, 2015. It features improved C++ 11/14 support. Compatibility. ABI. The Visual C++ compiler ABI have historically changed between major compiler releases. This is especially the case for SGL containers, where container sizes have varied a lot between compiler releases. Microsoft therefore recommends against using C++ interfaces at module boundaries when one wants to enable client code compiled using a different compiler version. Instead of C++, Microsoft recommends using C or COM interfaces, which are designed to have a stable ABI between compiler releases. C Runtime Libraries. Visual C++ ships with different versions of C Runtime Libraries. This means users can compile their code with any of the available libraries. However, this can cause some problems when using different components in the same program. A typical example is a program using different libraries. The user should use the same C runtime for all the program's components unless the implications are understood. Microsoft recommends using the multi-threaded dynamic link library to avoid possible problems. C99. Although the product originated as an IDE for the C programming language, for many years the compiler's support for that language conformed only to the original edition of the C standard, dating from 1989. The later revisions of the standard, C99 and C11, were not supported at all until Visual C++ 2012, which added support for various C99 features in its C mode. Visual C++ 2013 significantly improved the C99 support, though it is still not complete. Visual C++ 2015 further improves the C99 support, with full support of the C99 standard library, except for features that require C99 language features not yet supported by the compiler.